Good morning and welcome. My name is Phiona Lloyd-Hentry. I am both a praxis scholar and an activist educator who has served in a variety of educational roles. I have been a classroom teacher, a curricular head, a resource teacher, an instructional coordinator, and a high school administrator. Before beginning, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories on which I stand as I bring my remarks. I wish also to acknowledge and show respect for the rich cultures, traditions, and contributions that Indigenous people make to our lives. I would like to offer my respect to elders, past and present. Recently, I've begun to invest in learning more about my African ancestry. One interesting thing that I've learned is about the role of the Okiami, a high-ranking advisor to an Ashanti ruler, an intermediary who offers wisdom and counsel. The position of the Okiami encompasses a broad set of responsibilities, including mediation, judicial advocacy, political troubleshooting, and the preservation and interpretation of history. Like the Okiami, whose role abjures ideological neutrality and demands the ardent pursuit of truth and justice, today I will speak to you about more than just equity and the promise of diversity. Today I will, like the Okiami, encourage you to reflect on your own identities, your power and privilege, to go beyond the recognition of diversity, the fight for equity and inclusion, and instead strive for justice. Today I hope to raise in you some human consciousness that will allow you to construct meanings and be inspired to take some meaningful actions. Today, when we have the digital technological tools to achieve transformative goals that have been, up to this point, elusive, particularly for the marginalized, we can design and use it to speak truth to power. We can contribute to the common good and advance the cause of human rights. This requires a critique of how we have thus far used or leveraged digital technologies. We have to ask ourselves, have we used digital technologies solely for profit and plunder? Or have we used it for the greater good? To what extent has it served global human rights? Can digital technologies be used for justice when its designers are besought with human foibles? It would be remiss of me to speak to the promise of diversity, equity, and inclusion without speaking to the contemporary challenges we face. We are right now at a pivotal moment in world history, a point, that Arundhati Roy, the famous Indian novelist, calls a portal. 2020 has demonstrated the fragility of our very existence. The COVID-19 pandemic has ruptured the facade of our social cohesion, and it has isolated us in many ways from the people and the relationships that give meaning to our lives. What many previously thought of as the sound foundations of our society have been shaken in unprecedented ways. Worldwide, more than 1 million people have died, and close to 40 million people have been sickened by the coronavirus. What we have come to realize is that a disproportionate number of those who have been sickened or killed by this virus are people already plagued by poverty, inequality, and injustice. Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color, the old, the indigent, the residents of long-term care facilities, migrant farm workers, and the homeless have been among the hardest hit. The coronavirus has exposed the injustices and inequalities in our society. And to the extent that Canada or any other nation has fared better than some, it is a testament to the relative strength of public institutions, leadership, and active citizenry throughout the pandemic. Dubbed the twin pandemics by many anti-racists, COVID-19 has, for example, laid bare the persistence and the prevalence of anti-Black racism. A global protest movement sparked by the state-sanctioned murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in the United States, but resonating with other experiences of brutality, has prompted questions and the demand for answers about racism. Historically marginalized and vulnerable communities are asking whether society, governments, and justice systems can really deliver on the promise of equity and justice for all peoples. Or whether the promise is often simply justice, fair treatment, and prosperity for those who are privileged by race, color, gender, or socioeconomic status. We are at a turning point in world history. Which way will we turn? Our record in seizing such moments has, up until this point, not been perfect. There's no question that the internet and digital technologies can promote and protect the human rights of minoritized equity-seeking peoples. Through human rights education, through organizing human rights defenders, getting information on human rights violations out to folks in the world, to the public. Furthermore, digital technologies has the potential to change the equations of power. It has the potential to challenge the conventional channels of communication. It has the power to distribute and disseminate information about democracy. It can democratize channels and get rid of gatekeepers, people who previously needed to be or were the only sources of information. In many ways, we have seen a glimmer of promise that technology has afforded us during times of crisis. Through communication, through remote education, through remote healthcare, through trade, e-commerce, and entertainment. We've seen some of that in the pandemic. Remote learning, let's think about that. We've seen educators use digital tools right across the world and have been able to connect with, engage, and teach millions of children. We've seen remote medicine. Medical practitioners have been able to provide physical and mental medical advice to ill patients, saving lives by offering timely and productive medical consultations. We've seen we've seen e-commerce grow. We've seen through digital technologies that many people have been able to stay home and practice social distancing while having everything from food, entertainment, groceries delivered to them. We've seen in many ways that employment has been redefined and many people have been able to work from home. We've seen communication increase for some people who are talking to family members via video conferencing in ways that, many had not done in a long time. We've seen virtual calls, family gatherings, virtual parties, social activism. We have seen this grow. We've seen people mobilizing, organizing, getting out the vote, for folks. We've seen digital campaigns. We've seen whistleblowers talking about, issues of inequities in companies and organizations. We've seen people capturing and reporting on the misdeeds of the police. Now, in spite of the challenges And in spite of all of the promises that we see with digital technologies, we know that there are limits to these. Everything from invasion of privacy to monopolies on technologies. We've seen fake news grow astronomically. But in spite of all of these drawbacks as well, we cannot ignore the extraordinary contributions of technology to our lives. But as with every other aspect of our lives, most technologies there is, as much as you have the potential for good, you also have the potential for bad. We know that the field is overwhelmingly white. To get back to our topic about diversity and equity and inclusion, the field is overwhelmingly white and male. There's a persistent digital divide in access to both tools and the use of technologies. The field is almost absolutely monolingual, English dominated. And digital colonialism, a new form of colonialism that's showing up, where, companies, tech companies have proprietary software, corporate clouds, centralized internet services are used to collect, surveil, and process users' data for profit and plunder. So we've seen that also balloon. While the internet affords greater opportunity for e-commerce, for example, large companies monopolize global markets, making it difficult for small local businesses to compete. The impact transcends beyond e-commerce into communication, education, and entertainment. So it transcends all fields. Instead of shining a light on the concerns of the masses, for example, we see an amplification of the concerns of the few, those already imbued with power and privilege. For all the promise it represents, there's an extremely deleterious side. Racists, white supremacists, and other extremists use the internet to spread fake news, to incite hatred and violence. Cyber interference, foreign disinformation campaigns, these target democratic institutions and processes and seek to corrode society and overturn governments. So part of the human rights and internet issue is the question of how to prevent this and how we can ensure that we're making our concerns clear. Inequities and injustices in real life experiences are often replicated in the cyber world, where the consequences are equally, or if not more, destructive. As you design your projects, I invite you to think about how you can address those inequities. In education, the internet offers a potentially powerful way to develop and disseminate information. How can we use the internet to develop and use this information to support the work of equity and justice? How can we encourage partnerships by providing access and links to sites with key information that relates to justice? How can we leverage the power of the internet to bring the voices of justice advocates and educators and other policymakers? How can we counter misinformation and social media manipulation, particularly as they pertain to the targeting of equity-seeking groups who are particularly vulnerable and susceptible to these types of attacks? We need to act. How can we identify and address the use of fake, harmful, and illegal content on the internet? How can we promote self-regulation? How do we address, how do we use software filtering, codes of conduct, and so on, to hold social media platforms accountable for the content for the hate content on their sites, for example? How can we coordinate an offensive and give definition to injustices and discriminatory practices? How can we break through the barriers we face, leverage the expertise of human rights activists, overcome political obstacles to educate, inform, and become agents of change? The revolution in communication and information technology has improved our potential to advance the processes of democratization and global governance. We must ensure that as we use these in the service of human beings, we do not abuse or destroy these attributes that are also a part of digital technologies. Information technology can help in reorganizing international politics, give power and influence to the disenfranchised. It can empower new groups and reshape the makeup of international players. It can promote transformative values and foster more democratic societies and better governance with respect to the rule of law. Justice demands an active citizenry. Citizens who are ready, who are willing and able to participate in the political life of their country. This morning, I invite you to think of your own power and privilege and to think about how you can leverage those in the service of others, particularly others who are marginalized, who are disenfranchised, whose voices have been silenced or muted. What can you and your teammates do to help to create a more transformative future for all? Thank you.